This is everything you need to know before renting your first apartment. Hello and welcome to Practical Personal Finance, where you get the information you need to understand and succeed with money. Today, I'm going to share with you my advice for making sure you have a positive renting experience. I've learned a lot by being a renter over the past 10 years, and I'm excited to boil all that knowledge down into this one video. There are going to be 5 sections, each of them equally important to comprehend and understand. If you'd like a copy of my rental checklist, which includes all of the information outlined in this video in a Word doc, click the link down below and enter your email address. Let's get started with a discussion about understanding what you're renting. Apartments and condos are not the same thing, and that's a very important detail to understand when it comes to who you're going to be dealing with and how much noise you're going to have to endure. Whether you're living in an apartment or a condo, you're typically living in a big complex with dozens or even hundreds of units. With an apartment, that entire complex and all of the units are owned by one person or one entity, and everyone pays their rent to that one entity. If it's an efficiently run operation, that can be a good thing. You might have access to an online portal to pay your rent or a 24-hour maintenance hotline. But more often, you hear about it being a bad thing. That's because to the owner of an apartment complex, you're just an anonymous number. In many cases, they're going to raise the rent every single year, drag their feet when making repairs, and when it comes to making sure you're satisfied, they're only going to do what's legally required. On the other hand, with condos, each unit is owned individually by a separate owner. That's not to say someone can't own multiple condos in the same building, but it would be near impossible for them to own every unit in a complex. To that condo owner, you are their tenant. It's likely that a large portion of your rent every month goes toward paying a mortgage they have on the unit. If you leave, they're going to have to go through the trouble of finding a new tenant, and the property might sit vacant for a few months. For someone who owns an apartment building with 100 units, that's not really a big issue. But to someone who owns 2 or 3 condos, those lost rent payments could be problematic. That condo owner values you as a tenant in a way that the owner of an apartment building does not. In general, they're less likely to raise the rent every year. They're more responsive when it comes to repairs. And if there's a problem, they're going to go the extra mile to keep you happy. In addition to all that, there's the noise factor. The walls and floors you find in condos are typically thicker and better insulated for noise than the walls and floors you find in apartment buildings. This seems to hold true as long as the complex was originally built as condos and not as apartments, which were later converted to and sold individually as condos. So if you're a light sleeper or if you really like to avoid noisy neighbors, a condo will probably be your best bet. Real quick, before we move on, if you're getting some value out of this video so far, let me know by clicking that like button down below. By doing so, you're helping more people just like you find this video. Thanks. Next, let's talk about costs. One of the biggest questions you need to know the answer to before going and searching for a place to rent is, how much can you afford? Luckily for you, I made a video on that specific topic, and I'll leave a link down below. As a rule of thumb, a good starting point is 30% of your monthly take-home pay, after taxes are taken out. Other important factors to consider here are parking fees, if you have a car, and pet fees, if you've got a 4-legged friend. Back when I was shopping for my last rental, I found something my wife and I could afford, but it only came with 1 parking space. We have 2 cars. The complex wanted $100 per month for the extra spot in the garage. Suddenly, we were priced out. Some other expenses you need to think about include your cost to move in, your furnishings, and your monthly utility bills. The cost to move into a rental is generally going to be, at the very least, 2 times the rent. And in many cases, it'll be 3 times the rent and then some. You're going to have to pay your first month's rent and a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent in order to move in. That's a given. The security deposit is held by the unit owner until after you move out. If you leave the place as you found it, you get that money back. But if you leave a mess or cause damage to the unit, they get to use that money to make things right once you've left. With many rentals, you're also required to pay your last month's rent up front as well. And don't forget about potential application fees, extra security deposits for pets, and move-in fees. My wife rented a condo before we got married, and they charged her $100 to move in and $100 to move out. She had no choice but to pay up. Another big expense with moving to a new apartment is furniture, especially if you're brand new to renting and don't have any of your own just yet. If you're renting for the first time, my advice to you would be to avoid buying new furniture. Chances are you'll be moving in a year or two, and there's no guarantee you'll want to keep that furniture when you do. If you've ever tried selling a piece of used furniture, it's not easy, and you wind up getting a lot less than you paid for it. So take advantage of things like Nextdoor, Craigslist, and Facebook Marketplace. Get yourself some used furniture, and if you don't want it later, at least you'll be able to sell it for roughly the same amount you paid for it. Last but not least are utilities. Sometimes things like water, electric, and internet service are included in the rent, but most of the time they're not. Determine what type of utilities you're going to need to pay for on a monthly basis, and do your best to price them out in advance. You might be able to afford a beautiful apartment on the top floor with high ceilings, but if it gets hot during the summer, your electric bill is going to be through the roof. A great way to get an idea of what utilities will cost in a particular unit is by asking the previous tenant. If the unit's vacant, ask the owner or a neighbor for an estimate, and make sure you plan for those expenses. Next up is probably the single most important thing I'm going to talk about in this video. Before you decide on a place to rent, make sure you've visited and seen it in person. I cannot stress this point enough. Do not, under any circumstances, pay any deposits or sign any leases before you've set foot in the unit. Some apartment complexes will try to show you a sample unit, which they'll say is comparable to the unit you'll get. Don't do it. Some property owners will tell you that you need to send them a deposit now to hold the property for you before you've even seen it. Do not do it. And some of you watching will be tempted to sign a lease on a unit sight unseen because you're moving somewhere far away. Please don't do it. If you're moving long distance, rent an Airbnb for the first few days and then go and find a rental once you're there. Search anywhere online and you'll find horror stories from people who sign a lease and pay a deposit on a place before visiting. It's just a bad idea. Here are a few examples of why. Your complex could be in a really bad area with tons of crime. Your neighbors could be the type of people who are constantly playing loud music and stomping around. Or your particular unit could be infested with bugs or rodents. You're not going to know any of that stuff without going for a visit. Before you go, it's a good idea to search online for reviews about a particular complex you're considering. Look for patterns with the complaints about a complex, so you know what to expect in terms of issues that residents frequently face. Go on Trulia and look at the crime density map to get an idea of the type of area you're going to be living in. And when you're visiting to walk through the unit, talk to some residents. Meet your future neighbors. Most people will give you an honest assessment of what it's like living there. If the unit you're visiting is occupied and the tenant is there, ask questions about what the neighbors are like, issues with the unit, and their opinion of the unit owner. Doing so may help you avoid a year of misery. Topic number 4 involves the lease itself, and my advice is to read it, understand it, ask questions about it. You're agreeing to pay thousands of dollars for the right to occupy a rental unit for a specific period of time, usually a year. You need to make sure you understand the rules for living in that place and your responsibilities as a renter. If you don't read the lease, you might miss something, like the fact that you're responsible for paying $100 every time something needs to be repaired, regardless of whether it was your fault or not. Or that you're not allowed to have any open flames of any kind at any time, even candles. Or that if you don't let the owner know you're moving out 3 months in advance, they keep your security deposit. These are all things I've encountered over the years while renting. I was even fined $200 once, with no warning, for leaving my trash bin out overnight after the trash had been collected. I'm still salty about that one. The final topic I want to talk about today is renter's insurance. You need it. Seriously. This insurance will cover you if your personal property inside your rental unit is damaged or stolen, or if someone suffers an injury while visiting, or if your rental becomes uninhabitable and you need to rent somewhere else temporarily. There are a ton of things renter's insurance covers, and it's really flippin' cheap. I'm talking like $15 a month. No matter who you are or where you're living, if you're renting, you should have renter's insurance. To get renter's insurance, just go to any of the major insurance carriers like Progressive or Geico and fill out the application online. They may need to call you on the phone to complete the purchase, but it should be quick and easy. No excuses. Before I wrap things up, I want to give you one more tip to ensure you get your security deposit back in full after you move out. On day one, before you move any of your belongings into your rental unit, go in there and record a video walkthrough of the entire place. Open all the drawers, look inside all the appliances, turn all the faucets on and off, and note the condition of all the floors, walls, and ceilings. If there's anything broken or dirty, make note of it in the video. If the property owner later claims you caused damage, you now have video proof if it was already present before you moved in. It's like a free insurance policy to make sure you get your security deposit back in the end. Got any other questions about renting? Leave a comment down below, and I'd be happy to offer my advice. Don't forget about the free rental checklist with everything I just talked about. Link is in the description. If you're trying to figure out how much rent you can afford, click right here and I'll walk you through the process. And if you would like to support my channel, click right here to become a subscriber. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Andrew Shear, and I'll see you next time.